The people who waited, they paid a price.
Have the cap rates went up since last 5-6 months?
2023 and 2024 beat up the market so hard. There hasn't been a gigantic change because...
What made you want to stop?
I asked one of the producer people, I said, what do you think about my voice? And I could tell they were kind of like, it's never too late to come together and focus and give 100%. You just have to believe that you can do it. We set the record for Social Security. Eventually, this market's going to turn. You know, we're already seeing changes just in the last week with what's expected of Doge's influence.
Welcome to another episode of the Dealmakers Chronicles. Today's guest is Justin Fenn, a commercial broker with a background in broadcasting, law, and a national focus on industrial and government-leased assets. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Farouk.
Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. I know you get busy, but thank you for allocating this time.
Absolutely. You too, Farhad. Thank you.
So when I first reached out to you, I think we had like a 5-10 minute quick conversation. You mentioned to me that you had a background in broadcasting, and automatically I got a little nervous. I was thinking, oh wow, I hope he's not too judgmental about our setup. You know, we're bringing on somebody who knows what they're doing more than us. Usually we just do real estate people. They're like, okay, wow, I'm getting into it, amazing. But somebody like you, I think there's a lot of pressure on us today. So I hope we do good in your standards, all right?
It looks fantastic. I like your mics. I like the setup. Everything looks wonderful.
I love to hear
you.
that. So Justin, you have a diverse and great background. Tell us how you got into real estate. That's a question I love to ask people. How do you go down this path?
Yeah, so I initially got into it because my dad actually had a real estate brokerage. He initially got into real estate after he graduated from Miami University, just like I did, and my grandfather did, and my mom did. And then he was an officer in the Navy. Served in Vietnam, came back, and then got his real estate license. Eventually ended up taking over grandfather's business, which was a campground, and later franchising the Yogi Bear campground. That's why I grew up working on it. It was a great experience. And then when I was about 10 years old, he bought a brokerage became available in downtown Bellevue, Ohio, where I grew up. And, you know, we kind of listen to discussions at the dinner table and stuff, always about real estate, always about houses. And I liked it. I like just the design and look and things. Why is this house built that way? And touring the houses and also dealing with the people seemed interesting and exciting. And so when I was about 19 or 20, I figured, you know, this is something I want to give it a try. And I got my license when I was about 20. And I started selling houses for him. And, you know, just really like working with him. It was great too, because I could still do that, you know, during the summers when I was home from Miami University, which is in Oxford, Ohio, not the one in Coral Gables. Anyway, and then anything that needed just kind of wound up and taken care of after I had to go back to school, you know, he and the other agents, you know, he's the broker, other agents could take care of that. And then after I graduated and I was in law school, I actually realized they had a real estate path there too. And the capstone was commercial real estate, of all things. I didn't really think much about commercial real estate. I figured maybe it's, you know, building a mall or something. You know, I just wasn't really sure. And in fact, our capstone project was a mall development in Chicago. And through that, I immediately went into my first job out of law school, which was working for LexisNexis. I was a legal research analyst for them. And it just followed from there, where I always thought, okay, this is something that I know, I like it. I could see the path being productive. You get to work with other people. So it combines things I know, like, you know, everyday people skills and reading people and understanding what they're after, with also negotiation, with also the actual product. You know, what is it? It's real estate, which I enjoy.
How does broadcasting play into all of that?
So I started getting into that probably when I was literally like probably 8, 9, 10 years old. I would watch all these, basketball and football games with primarily with my dad, and I always liked how the announcers would jump in at just the right time, and I like sort of like mimicking what they were saying on the screen, and then I would go and I always liked how they would tell the highlights and stuff. This was really, ESPN and all that. We didn't have cable, but occasionally you could see, different show wrap ups and summaries and things. I mean, this was back when, at one point we got a satellite dish. And I always thought it was funny if we watched the Cleveland Cavaliers, and when they would play a road game, the the announcers, when they go to a station break, we would get the live feed. These guys didn't even know they were still on the air, and you could just listen to them talk. Oh, what was it like staying at the hotel last night? Was the food any good? And all this kind of stuff. And I always thought, wow, it looks like they're having a great time. They're getting to just talk about sports, and then they get to go back and do the podcast. They're part of the action. And I figured out relatively early I was not extremely athletic. So if I wanted to be a part of what was going on, this was a more realistic path. And literally, I think I got lucky because I had my mom as a teacher in third grade. She's a fantastic teacher, and then I had another one of my all-time favorite teachers, Marv Myers, was my teacher in fourth grade, and they would allow me to talk about sports. Mark would even let me get up in front of the class and tell the little sports report once or twice a week or something. And so anyway, after that, I became friends with a guy in high school who later ended up being the um, director at Kent State of their sports program, their radio program. And anyway, we would do baseball broadcasts together and stuff like that. And in between, I would occasionally get to do like an interview of different people. I got to interview Archie Griffin, I think, when I was maybe like 13 or 14 years old. And then I got a radio show when I was maybe like 15 or 16 at the local FM station. And so that just carried on from there.
Interesting. So, you had the prodigy approach to broadcasting. You started so early, and it seemed like you've accomplished a lot. So, what made you want to stop, or why did you stop?
So I think it's important to have people who are able to level with you and tell you, do you have a great radio voice? Do you not? It's something that you kind of have or you don't. I mentioned the guy earlier that I worked with in high school. His name's Ty Linder. Ty had wonderful, bellowing, deep voice. He loved baseball, and so I could see this is the kind of voice that people like to listen to. And then later, when I was in college at Miami, another guy I got to do radio work with, Nick Brunker. Nick went on to be the voice of the Cincinnati Cyclones minor league hockey team, and then he works in media now. And I was just thinking about my voice compared to theirs. And I got an opportunity to work on a local NPR station while I was at Miami, and I would do like the local like weather and traffic updates and stuff like that. And I would listen to the guys that had the full anchor shows, and they had the deep bellowing voice, all those. And I thought, this just doesn't. So finally, I asked one of the producer people. I said, well, what do you think about my voice? And I could tell they were kind of like they didn't want to be mean, but they were kind of like, well, it's a little high pitched. You don't have like the deep bellowing voice. And I thought, okay. And then I thought, well, I like long form stuff anyway. This was really way before podcasts and stuff. This was like 2000, 2001, 2002. If we were lucky, we could do stuff on, mini discs, or they had something even another kind of technology. It was like these little they look like tiny little micro cassettes that you could take around, and when I did stories like out on a live site or something interview, I use those. But my point is, I feel like I kind of got the hint. I probably was not going to be, a top radio broadcaster or something like that. So let me try to incorporate my ability to, interview people and research and things like that, and see if there's still a path to use my public speaking ability, but not in a way where I'm just trying to be a broadcaster.
So, going back to that radio voice, and I agree with you. Sometimes I hear these guys, and it's as if I don't know they were genetically engineered to sound like that. Is that something they work on, or are you just born with that voice?
I think it's hard to change, especially if you're trying to be yourself. I don't think that it's something you can really augment a lot. Thankfully, we live in an era where there's so many more opportunities now for people to get their voice out there. I think if you don't have a bellowing voice, you can still articulate pretty well. You see more and more people that probably have that voice. I always think about,
Mhm.
Bill Simmons, who's been about everywhere. He's been at ESPN, he's, HBO, et cetera. And he's got his own channel now. Very, very successful. A lot of the same ideas I thought about incorporating in the early 2000s were a lot of the same things he ended up doing. So it was the execution I'll give him credit for. He doesn't have that deep, radio voice like you might say. But man, is his content fantastic? His sourcing is fantastic. His insight. So that's what sets him apart. So I think you got to have at least one of the two.
Right.
Got it. So you're broadcasting. You're thinking, okay, let me go down this path, and you're also studying to go to be a lawyer. I assume. Like, what was your major in college? Because I know you went to law school right after college. So how was that path?
Well, if you can believe it, I had 4 majors in 4 years. So,
Oh, wow.
it's interesting, my dad was in the business school when he was at Miami, and, he was more like general business. I, started out in mass communications because I knew I loved the broadcasting part of it, and when I started to learn more about the curriculum, it turned out that, actually getting on the equipment and doing more of the broadcast work, within the program was gonna be something more like 2nd or 3rd year, and I already was able to negotiate a deal with the student radio station, before I even show up on campus where they were gonna give me a radio show. It started out, I think it was maybe at night, and then it was the pregame show, but, would just study for that, and I would prepare for that, that for Saturday's game, I'd make sure Friday I would be, studying the rosters of the opposing team, and I would see what are the interesting bios, what are the storylines, and I would do the show, and, I think initially it was at least 2 hours. I think it went to 3 hours. I would do pretty much the whole show by myself, and then later we would add guests, and I would have I think it was a Monday night show where we had 3 or 4 guests, and uh, my thinking there was, if I'm able to get those, 10,000 hours of experience and see where that leads, I think I don't need to be a mass comm major because I was really lucky at Bellevue. Bellevue High School got a grant. I think they were one of maybe 2, 3, 5 schools in the whole state that was they were able to secure these TVs and broadcast system set up. So I got to do the morning news and things like that in high school. And we got to take a tour of a local station in Toledo, and people were asking, how do these stations decide who they hire? And a lot of it was understandably on your tapes. How good are your audio tapes? And I thought, whether or not I have a 4.0 in this degree, I got to have the street smarts to say they're really going to care about how good I sound, not, whether or not I ace some test about understanding, marketing and mass communication, the history of those channels. So, after giving that a year, and Miami is, they have a broad-based program. So, I'm taking a, architecture class and, geology class and, every kind of math, all different things, right? So if you do change majors, it's not like you completely start over. Some of those things apply to a later path. So then I did 1 year in the business school. Miami's business school is fantastic. They recently were kind enough to ask me to come back and speak to the school, and I loved that experience talking with them and seeing how bright these kids that are in undergrad, these finance majors are coming along. But I realized it was tiered much more towards a lot of Fortune 500 companies getting you ready to go. They have a very strong accounting program. I didn't love accounting, so I figured I'm more entrepreneurial. I'm like my dad. Maybe a small town type of approach would fit me better running a small business. And so after that, I thought, well, if I go into English, I can do broadcast. And Miami didn't have a freestanding school of journalism then. They were working on it. I graduated in 2004 and they added it in 2006. So anyway, they would let me do some of these more, English literature based classes. And then the last year I could focus on the journalism path. So junior year was mainly English, and that was when I was applying to law school anyway. So that served very well. And then in my final year, I thought, well, I had already interned at a local newspaper, and I did feature writing and sports writing and long form interviews and things like that for them. So I thought, I could also then, for whatever reason, law school doesn't work out, I could go and be a feature writer. And um, I ended up deciding through that path. I said, okay, let me see what you want to give yourself outs in life, right? You want to give yourself some opportunities. One of my best friends at Miami, John Briskin, his brother-in-law was doing some sports agency work and got us a job with the Cincinnati Sting, which at the time was a arena football league team, like AFL. Um, Although I found out they were AFL two, I didn't even know there was an AFL two. But anyway, it was really neat. We went down to Fifth Third Arena. They were super nice. We got to do some intern work for them. And I thought, well, this will be great. I could either do real estate, commercial development, something after law school, or I could be a sports agent, something like that. And so then from there, I went to law school. Really enjoyed that experience. I didn't really do anything with broadcasting then. I mentioned to you in the pre-call. I had, I think it finished as the longest running sports program, radio show in Miami's history. Um, and part of the reason, we won best specialty show, I think 3 out of 4 years. Part of the reason we won, we had really good staff, really good people on the show. One of the other guys on our show was Clinton Yates. Clint ended up, doing Pardon the Interruption and Around the Horn and all that. Just recently retired from that show. Fantastic writer and broadcaster at ESPN. And, I remember him telling me he was gonna get an internship with Mike Wilbon, and, he was gonna do great things, and boy, did he back it up. So, it was wonderful to see all that evolution.
Very nice. So now, you finished law school. What made you choose the commercial real estate aspect of the business? Because like you mentioned, your father was on the residential side, and then you kind of got introduced to the commercial side. So what made you kind of say, I fit more on the commercial side?
So, one of the things I was kind of unsure about with residential was, the internet was becoming really powerful. People were able to go on, realtor.com and all this, and they were able to, see fantastic pictures of the homes. By that point, everybody had a cell phone. I mean, I did get a cell phone until like 2002, you know. Uh, so, I could see the industry was changing, and I liked, again, some of these a little more analytical or some of my research background could benefit me, and doing more like long form transactions, not just something where it's like, okay, you're going to show these houses today and then you're going to have, so many closings. And I was try to explain to people, if you have a house, at the time, houses weren't selling for crazy prices like they are now, especially in, let's say a smaller town. So let's say take a small sale, let's say it's $100,000 and you get a 6% fee, you know, the agent doesn't get $6,000. The agent gets, maybe $3,000 or something, and that's if they, double ended, and that's if they, you got to factor in their overhead, their costs and different things. So, it's a business. You saw during the last run up, where things went absolutely bonkers in the market in 2020 to definitely 21 was kind of the height, right? But 22 was hot also. And, the comment was, some of these people were, maybe they were working at Home Depot, and then they, got their real estate license. And then when the market crashed, they were going back to Home Depot. Um, That's something that I wanted a business that was more long form, that could have long-term relationships and repeat business with people and understand how to help them shape their entire portfolio. And if you help educate owners, hey, you just got a new lease or you're in the process of negotiating this lease. If you have a termination clause in there, it's really going to hurt your value. Let me help you. That can make the difference of millions of dollars in value. It can make the difference of whether or not they transact and get into something that's a better thing for them to own long term. And especially, let's say they have kids that don't want to actively manage a property, they need to be in a triple net or absolute net property instead. You're helping reshape the future of that family and the money that they're going to have, which is going to open up so many doors for them and allow them to sleep better at night. So it was about being able to make huge changes and really help people.
As you're doing this, you're going through college, you're doing broadcasting, and you're studying for law. So I assume law was always a backup plan for you. Oh, I'll try something else. If anything, I'll fall back to it. As you're setting up this path for yourself, are you thinking to yourself, is it definitive? Are you stressing, oh, where am I going to go? Are you uncertain, or is it more like, oh, I'm easygoing. I'll just do broadcasting. If it doesn't work out, law school is plan B if you need B, and then commercial real estate is where I'm going. Was it definitive, or was it kind of like you were a little bit sidetracked as you were going through it?
It was a challenge of, like I said, giving yourself some backup plan, giving yourself some options if things don't actually work out with your first plan. But of course, also, giving 100% to the thing that you're in. That's one of the things that I'll see sometimes in the business that we're in today. If newer agents, they don't fully commit to the process and they don't, just burn the boats and just go completely to what they're doing and focus on here and now. It's easy for them to just say, well, you only got one foot in this business. If it doesn't work out, that's okay. I could easily go do something else. If that tug on them is so hard, they're never going to go and fully commit to the job they're doing. So for me, it was a lot about saying, okay, I think that these are some things I could have success in. I ultimately found, okay, like I'll give you an example. When my wife and I moved from Dayton area, Beaver Creek to Dublin, Columbus area, uh, my in-laws have a electrical contracting business. They were very graceful and gave me an opportunity to work for them. And it just so happened, we were starting this massive casino project, and, so, I did coordination for that, and I did like it. It was very interesting. I learned a ton about the business, about the development side and construction that I had never seen before. But I always felt that, that feeling that really I liked dealing on the brokerage side, and I liked working in real estate, more than construction. So, um, funny enough, my mother-in-law's close friend that worked at the office, she said, have you tried this? I think it was Indeed or one of these sites, and I saw this real estate posting. It was Marcus and Millichap. Well, this was before they went public. I had never seen an ad for Marcus and Millichap. I didn't know what they were. Never heard of them. And it was so interesting because I read up on it. I thought, well, this is fascinating. They sell commercial real estate, but they don't do leasing. They don't do property management. They're only focused on transactional brokerage. And I thought, if that's all what they're doing, they're totally 100% passionate about that. They have to have a very good business model to be successful in that. And I started reading about how good the training program was. And so anyway, I started that in December of 2012, and obviously still with them today. So it's been a great experience.
A lot of people mention that training program with Marcus and Millichap. We work with a lot of agents out in New York City, New Jersey. What's something about that training program that stands out for you as opposed to I know you didn't go with other ones, but we've heard other ones are don't really stand up to Marcus Millichap training program for new brokers.
I think that it's a lot about kind of my mentality for how I approach my business. We can get into this later, but just like operating on a national platform, like don't confine yourself, don't think small. Go for the win, think big. I think for them, they realize if you're actually committed to selling on a national platform and leveraging each other's listings and knowledge and specialization, it will work. If you retreat to, "Well, I just got to protect like the stuff stuff that falls in my lap, and I gotta, silo myself, and let's not talk to these other people in the office. Let's not talk to these other people that are in my field at literally the same brokerage. Maybe they're fellow CBRE or Colliers or JLL or whoever, that they're all at the same brokerage, but they work in another office. If they're not leveraging those people and working with those people, co-listing with those people, doing deals with those people, that is a huge missed opportunity. And when you look at what the original founders, Marcus Millichap, did, they started working on putting out these paper listings. This was back before we had all the computers, electronics, and everything. This is late '70s. uh, they were having to put these out in books and make phone calls so people could see, wow, here's stuff for sale. In Northern California, somebody in Southern California could see it, somebody in other states could see it, and that revolutionized how the industry could transact. You could bring additional buyers, you could command higher prices, you could also then command higher fees because you were more valuable as an agent. So everyone wins, and that was what they based their model on. The problem where it's like if you follow just a lot of successful businesses to try to scale, they make the mistake of either growing too fast or not properly training up the people. They have one or two really sensational people, and then the
Right.
people below them or the new people just don't have the same talent or pizzazz or anything. And so it's hard to duplicate the magic of those original people. The reason those businesses were successful is because those original people were also very special. And so instead of making that mistake, they said with each, evolution, we have to grow as a company and change as well. So, they were one of the first ones to adopt what we have Mnet now. It's a national database, a platform where you can see all the listings in the firm. And then through COVID, they were, as far as I could tell, the preeminent adopters of making everything ready to be remote and making sure they had, all the quality support, all of the things that how we could easily do meetings remotely. And they realized that people like to do, these virtual telecasts or video conferencing. That was something they're like, we'll pay the money for the license. We'll invest in the research tools. We'll give the people the top of the line software. And it was the courage to make those capital investments that set them apart.
And one thing I noticed with I would know like my brother said, a bunch of Marcus and Millichap people, top guys. You rarely, like you said, like rarely do you have people who don't do well in the company. Almost seems like everybody who starts to work there gets to that level. They may not be the top guys, but everybody's doing well. Everybody knows what they're doing. There's not such a big disparity between the regular guy and the guy who's top performing. And I've never met anybody who actually left Marcus and Millichap. It almost seems like if you start there, you finish your career there, and if you don't start there, you come from somewhere else, but you stay there. Now, with what you said you do primarily leasing. Is that correct? You don't
Transactional
do,
work. I don't do leasing, but I do transactional brokerage, buying and selling.
and you primarily focus on government assets. You lease to the
Yeah,
government.
yeah, government, industrial. So, give you an example. Somebody will have maybe it's a U.S., Customs and Border Protection, or a Social Security Administration, or an IRS building, whatever the case may be. It's typically a single tenant office building or flex or industrial building that the government occupies, and they occupy it, hopefully on a long-term lease. But basically, we then go and it's the value of that property. We put up that property for sale. Some other, usually an investor, whether it's mom and pop, REIT, institutional, family office, they buy that investment. And then when the government renews, then they typically sell it again, and that is usually the process. Same thing with, industrial, typically triple net, whether it's a trucking business or a manufacturing plant or a warehouse or distribution facility, same sort of idea.
So when it comes to government leases, especially with what's been happening recently, how has it been affected now that, before, like you said, if the IRS signed a lease for the next 20 years, they're going to stay there no matter what. Now, with the possibility of leases being canceled or taken out, how has that affected the values of the properties?
So I try to explain to sellers, government was a very successful category in 2017, 18, 19, and then through the pandemic. When we first had the pandemic, a lot of people were very concerned, what's going to happen next? I said, this is the absolute time to strike because the market's going to go nuts. And the people who listened to me did very well. The people who waited, they paid a price because, as interest rates remained incredibly low, people were able to take advantage of that with confidence in the market. They thought, my goodness, even if the government shuts down, quote unquote, or we see all these businesses shut down during COVID, the government's still paying their rent on time, even if they have a situation either through Congress, there's temporary shutdown, whatever. They make it up later. I mean, you always get paid as a landlord was the takeaway, and so that was an excellent time to sell government real estate. In the current era, I have to explain to sellers, we have a lot of buyers who are scared right now to make that leap. You have to have long-term leases, you have to have a compelling deal story, you have to have reasons that people can see a path to the government staying there, or if the government would leave, that you don't have to worry because you can easily backfill that location with a competent tenant, whether it's a government contractor, a state government tenant, maybe it's a medical office tenant, an office specialty, or something in between. If it's industrial, same idea, right? What's the proper tenant? Maybe it's an owner user. And so the ones that don't have that type of deal story, I'm very upfront with them. This is a time for you to look into other avenues. If there's any vacancy at the facility, push that, improve that, optimize your property management, and get yourself in position. So, down the line, it's the time to strike. And if you need to sell it now, that's fine too. We just need to price it appropriately.
Have the cap rates went up since, the last 5, 6 months since the new administration?
There hasn't been a gigantic change because I think, 2023 and 2024 beat up the market so hard in that arena. We didn't see a massive drop off. What we saw was just a constriction of the buyer pool. The number of buyers who normally, let's say, for example, we had, a pretty respectable single tenant government facility for sale. Yeah, maybe, 3, 4 years ago, you would get 5, 6, 7 offers for that property. Maybe those offers now are dwindling to 1 to 3 offers. That's a reality. What I always explain to sellers, though, is eventually this market's going to turn. We're already seeing changes just in the last week with what's expected of Doge's influence, what's expected of current leadership in terms of how they're going to go and try to reduce or eliminate some of these leases. I was talking to somebody just last week about this, and I said, they were in a particular market where I said, okay, I went and drilled down. I said, you know what? In your whole city, there's only been 2 major leases that were terminated by Doge. And in each case, it was one that was about to end anyway, and another one was in a small, very old building that is nothing like what you have. So it's being able to distinguish that because it's a lot of fear in the market. There's not a lot of places. In fact, I don't have one owner I've talked to that had their space eliminated by Doge. I mean, it's a very small group. The concern obviously is in the future: is there going to be a problem with funding? Are they not going to renew, et cetera? I understand why buyers and sellers have those concerns. So again, it's if you look at the historical turnover in GSA, it's very, very low. There's very minimal turnover. It's between a first generation, it's typically 98% renewal to a second generation. Maybe they've been there 10, 20 years. It's still very high. It's still 89 to 96% renewal rates, usually around 90, 92%. So it's something that I try to explain. You're being worried about something that's very unlikely to happen. Let's look at what's more probable to happen, which is if they do renew, what kind of rates are they going to renew? Are they going to renew with an increase? Are they going to hold steady? And then also, if they don't renew, what's your contingency plan?
When it comes to canceled leases, does the government pay the remaining balance of the lease or they just stop making payments? How are those leases structured?
Thankfully, this is something that almost never comes up. I mean, I've seen it very rarely. I can think of 2 instances, and in both of those, they weren't deals I was involved in, but they were ones that had a fluke issue. One was not long after 9/11. There was a government building that had a railroad that ran right behind it. and they ended up being worried that somebody could potentially, jump onto that train car, get close enough to the building to attach a bomb to the building or do something else, untoward. And so they needed to relocate. I believe in that case, they still paid out the remainder of the firm term. And then there was another one, similar type of random concern. There was a problem where they had mold in the building. They couldn't remediate it. They gave them, yeah, I think 1 to 2 years to figure it out, and they still couldn't do it for whatever reason. And that again was a very fluke situation. I've never heard of either of those situations before or since, and that was years and years ago. So I think in those cases, they typically are still always paying out the firm term. It's the soft term, the term that's outside of uh, after the lease termination kicks in, right? That's where you got to be concerned. So that's why I always tell owners, if you're negotiating with the government and you can get lease that's 10 years firm or 13 years firm rather than 13 years with only 10 firm or 10 years with only 5 firm, do whatever you have to get that to be all firm term, if you plan on selling it, because it will make a difference, because lenders care, buyers care. And that's why, at the National Federal Development Association meetings in DC, it's one of the things when we speak to the federal government, we explain, if you make these leases guaranteed, you'll have more developers and owners want to step in, which increases your pool of people to choose from when you put these out for bid, and when you're working with private sector. You want more of these lease buildings to be owned by investors who want to own them, not people who are, looking to potentially make an exit because they're afraid that this soft term is going to present a problem for them. The reality for most owners that have had these soft term leases is they usually just are stuck in no man's land where they can't refinance the property, or at least they're going to have trouble refinancing it because it's a soft term lease. Or they just know that this time is coming, 12 to 18 months out from when the lease ends, and they're going to now have to go and negotiate with the government on an extension, and they're just hanging out there. The government almost never leaves a lease but prior to the end of its term, even if this, let's say it's got 3 years remaining, a soft term, pretty safe bet they're going to stay there for the remainder of that soft term. You're just maybe not going to get an indication, especially if you don't have a good relationship with the branch manager that's going to like level with you as the CO, the contracting officer. If they're not going to give you an indication that they're going to stay, maybe you have a problem. Otherwise, pretty safe bet that you're going to be able to work something out.
Does the investor profile differ from somebody who's buying government leased assets to someone who's buying a big box office retail stores like Dwayne Reed, CVS? Is it the same buyer, or are these different people?
It depends what type of portfolio they're going for. If there's somebody who wants to own in a particular region, they don't believe in diversifying, owning in several different markets. And it's something that it's funny coming out of the 2010, 11, 12, after '08 and that whole market recession that we had, it was interesting to watch how much there was a discussion about you need to diversify and own in different markets. And then when the market got hot, and interest rates were low, people kind of got a little lazy and thought, well, I really don't need to abide by that. And then we saw with all the recent natural disasters, especially with, the hurricanes, the one that went up and ran through from Florida all the way to, the Carolinas, that made people reconsider, maybe I need to make sure that I own in several different geographical markets, and maybe I need to diversify. My instruction to those owners is you also need to diversify by category. So don't have all your eggs in multifamily. Don't have all your eggs in one basket. Don't own just in retail, because different sectors are gonna rise and fall. So you need to be prepared. The thing that a lot of investors will get right when they go through either the pain or they see others go through that pain is they'll say, I need to have experience with what type of lease matches the type of credit and investment goals I have. So for example, if they really want double A plus credit, they really want, the credit you get from the federal government, GSA credit, awesome. Your lender will love that too. However, if you've never owned a full service gross lease before and you've never read a government lease before, expect there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. Thankfully, a lot of our sellers of government assets will willingly stay on and manage the property for a very reasonable fee, 3.5, 4%. So typically, you can go and have that existing owner who knows the property better than anybody else stay on and manage it for you. If you want to pocket that difference and self manage, or you want to farm it out to a third party management company that you know and trust, that's fine too. But to answer your question, I think we typically look for owners who either are prepared for that. It's not a triple net coupon clipper. It's also not, overly burdensome in terms of management. We can help you with education on the lease, but they need to be aware that that is the type of investment that they're getting into. It's similar to if you got into a full service gross lease and office industrial of a different category. It's the same type of lease structure. It's just a different tenant, and you now have a tenant that probably will stay and has fantastic credit.
Yeah, and with these type of properties, usually you buy them for the income, right? So you buy it at a certain kind of cap rate. You look at what your interest rate looks like. You say to yourself, "What does my cash on cash looks like?" A lot of people compare it to buying a bond. It's a safe asset, especially if it's a long lease. The problem with triple net properties or properties where you have a single tenant is that you have a definitive growth, right? Let's just say you have rent appreciation of 2%, 3% yearly. Now, the issue is, with bonds, where you don't have to refinance them. With assets like these, you do. And if you buy something at a low cap rate and the interest rate doubled over the last 3, 4 years, I would assume that a lot of sellers or a lot of investors who are holding these assets having a very difficult time refinancing and just refinancing the debt without even taking any kind of cash out. Have you come across any investors who had a cash in event where they said, "Oh, I'd rather sell this asset"? Are you seeing any of these investors in trouble not being able to refinance?
Well, luckily, those have been few and far between, especially since in, the triple net industrial, if that industrial property doesn't have great credit or it's not a credit rated asset at all, unless it has a really long lease, 20, 25-year lease. If it's 10 or 15 years or shorter, even if it's absolute net or triple net, unless it's got great fundamentals, really strong location, it's probably still going to be something that's trading in that, 6.5 to 9 cap area. Let's just say typically 7.5 to 8 cap, right? And for a GSA, they thankfully fall in about the same buyer pool as well. Depending on the NOI, they could be a $5 to $10 million asset, but in terms of the cap rate, they're going to be about the same. They're going to be something in that 8 to 9 cap range if it's a stronger asset, 6.5, 7.5. So that presents a great opportunity because if they do face today's interest rates on a refinance, they still have a little bit of room. Same thing with buyers. If buyers, if they're looking to buy a government asset and they can get it for an 8.5 or a 9 cap, and they can get a decent, interest rate, let's say 6.25, 6.5, maybe a little bit better, depending on the bank and what their PFS looks like, their personal financial statement. That gives them an opportunity to still have the, 150, 250 bip yield spread that they're looking to enjoy.
Why would you say the cap rates are so much higher for government rate assets, right? If you look at a multifamily property, you'll be at 5.5, 6% cap. And you would think a government leased asset is a very safe investment, especially if it has a long term lease. So why would you say these assets are trading for 8, 8.5? It doesn't seem like there's a huge amount of buyers who want them. Otherwise, the cap rates would get smaller. Why is that?
Well, I think we're going through a period right now where because the interest rates are high and because people are seeing, what happened in the news with Doge and, potential downsizing, that is sucking some buyers out of the market. That's definitely a concern. But if you look historically, that was typically not the case. I mean, that's why I tell buyers this is a unique time to capitalize. Because there are going to be some buyers right now that are just going to say, I'm not really sure about the market. It's too uncertain. Also obviously this relates to where else are they putting their money, right? Not just are they putting in O&I, office industrial. Are they putting in completely other asset classes and completely other investment vehicles, right? Are they putting in stocks? Are they putting in bonds? Are they putting in crypto? So, and there are a number of other things, right? gold and all this. So the point is, I think that people need to consider, what's their risk appetite, okay, when they come into this, because when we had at the top of the market, let's say, 2020, 2021, when the market was humming, I mean, I was able to sell several government properties for 6, 7, 7.5 cap, all cash, relatively quick close. We even sold one. We set the record for a Social Security, so an SSA in the Carolinas sold it for, I think it was like a 5.9 cap. So I mean, and that was, it had less than 10 years, I think, firm on the lease. So I mean, there was a strong push to market. I think that strong push will come back. So right now we're in a lull. It reminds me of what happened in the, let's say 2016, 17, 18 period with industrial, where people kind of woke up. They started realizing industrial is becoming a prized asset class. And a lot of those things that you could get in 2013, 14, 15 for a 10, 11 cap were slowly coming down. And then during, the height of the hot market during the pandemic, those same properties were trading for, 6.5, 7 caps, right? So, they moved 350, 400, 450 bips. And so to answer your question, I think that a lot of people are able to capitalize on that uncertainty and that fear in the market right now. But also for the properties that are on short-term leases, or maybe maybe it's all firm term, but it's only like 5 or 6 years. There's going to be a way smaller buyer pool for those. As they say, what do I do in 5 or 6 years? They want something that goes out a lot longer term. And to find those new 20, 15, 20-year firm term leases, those are somewhat few and far between right now. The government went through a cycle starting in, I think it was like 2009, 10, 11, where they said, we want to freeze the footprints, what they called it. So they wanted to not expand a lot of their existing buildings that were leased, and I think some of that may have extended to owned as well. But like those large, agency headquarters that you hear about, they're kind of a different animal. They're almost always government owned. They're not owned by an investor. And that gets into all the interagency discussions about, is this just dedicated to one agency? Are they going to try efficient and put multiple agencies in one large building? And then how do they control badge swipes, security level? Does one agency require different security and different pieces of equipment and entry and everything than another? So that's a whole discussion they have to deal with internally. But for investors, they just simply need to look at, is this asset going to fit my risk profile? And if they want something really conservative, we always recommend either hold out for that long-term lease, and we'll obviously get them to you as they become available, or you could go into something that is much more readily available, like a triple net industrial sale leaseback. That's a valuable tool for a lot of industrial owners to free up capital. They can go and buy more equipment, hire more labor, et cetera, and they're still in the same building they've always, operated out of for years. They just now pay rent and they get an immediate infusion of capital.
Absolutely. One thing I was gonna ask you, most of the guys that we speak to are either multifamily, industrial, retail office. How'd you get into the government, lease space? Because that's one of more niche spaces in real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started out selling medical office, and which makes sense. My wife's a pediatrician. I had some experience with initial medical office that she had operated out of, and basically, I started to learn that maybe I wasn't most passionate about medical office. And part of that was that some of the subcategories that cross over into net lease that are, readily saleable, more coupon clip kind of assets like dialysis centers. They're in the medical space, but they're more net lease. I just wasn't passionate about selling those. And it reminded me of something I brought up when I spoke at the business school, which was before I worked for my dad, I sold Cutco cutlery, and they have a great training program too. And just like Marcus and Millichap. And one thing that was so funny was I was so puzzled the first couple weeks. We would go to these meetings. It would be like at, 7 or 8 o'clock at night in this building in downtown Sandusky. And I didn't know it was possible to talk about knives for an hour and a half or 2 hours in sitting and have meeting and meeting about knives. And it later dawned on me, they realized that they needed us to become obsessed with the quality of the knife. The salespeople needed to genuinely believe that this is the best knife out there. Because if we didn't believe it, how was the customer going to believe it? And thankfully it is. I mean, I use these knives every day. I mean, I just used a Cutco knife this morning at breakfast. I mean, they're sensational, but it was something that we had to learn the product and know the product better than anybody else and be totally passionate about this is the best cutlery set that you could possibly have in your house, and this is why you need to own it. And that really registered with me, like, you need to genuinely believe in the product, you need to be passionate about it, and so it has to have something that appeals to you, and, my business partner, Dan Yozwiak, who, he and Darpan Patel is still my business partners today, love working with them. uh, Dan had a great idea. He thought, well, we had some other business partners and leaders on the team come and go, and he knew that he was, great at selling net lease, and he could tell that I was taking a liking to these Dollar Generals that he was selling. And I liked them because they were relatively predictable. They were all kind of the same. They were, like all like 9,100 square feet, and they were all like the relatively the same kind of build of building, and they all had the relatively similar kind of lease. So there's a uniformity that you weren't going to have this burn and this friction trying to relearn the wheel every time when you could sell them, and you could sell them, anywhere. I mean, they were a commodity, right? So I started learning that and I started selling them. Like Dan always says, you don't always have to have a home run, uh, just a little single and a double here, can work, especially for people relatively new in the industry, right? You need to get a check, you need to get something to keep you going. And so I started selling those. And as I was doing that, I was also databasing more of these large scale office buildings and these single tenant assets that had good credit. And I came across a few of these Social Security Administration buildings. And I really liked him because I thought, okay, I'm very analytical. I can read these leases. I could tell these leases were like annoying. People would complain they didn't like how long and complicated the government leases were. I didn't think they were that bad, especially once you just even read two or three of them. You kind of notice a lot of them are relatively similar. So once you get the template down, you were going into a category that not a lot of people were venturing into. I sold my first one in 2014, and I thought, okay, here's an opportunity. And then I sold another one, and I realized, when some people maybe they have a big sale and they think this is time to take their foot off the gas, this is their time to take a vacation, this is their time to just, even if you just do something very prudent and responsible, like you take that money and you just invest it in your 401k or whatever, that's a totally normal, reasonable thing to do. What I wanted to do was try to take the market and reinvest in my business. So I went and, bought another computer monitor so I could have three computer monitors, and now I have four. And, I went and hired an analyst, and that was going so well. I hired two more analysts, and I hired an intern, and so I wanted to have every single government property database. I wanted to track every single sale. I wanted to track every single listing across the entire country. And I realized there were very few people doing that. Maybe no one was doing it at the scale I was doing it. And so then when I would talk to owners, they could realize that I knew the market better than anybody else. And that led to, me just focusing and drilling down on that particular specialty. And, later on, I realized it made sense to still layer in some of the mixed use and the retail because Dan and Darpan do that so well. And, obviously, if there's a development deal or there's some kind of net lease deal that makes sense, or all the industrial stuff that's came our way that's been excellent to sell, and I really do love industrial. We continue to sell those. But to answer your question, it was figuring out a path to take the next step. If you see an opportunity, take the market, and then you
Right.
can succeed in that specialty.
I mean, you're doing it seems like a lot. A national database, you have analysts, you have interns. What does your day-to-day look like now? How much of it do you spend working on the deals that are in progress? And how much time do you spend on the day prospecting on new deals?
It varies depending on how hot the market is, frankly, and also, what my inventory is. You always see like where you're weak. Just a couple weeks ago, I closed the deal and I thought, okay, you know, that's great, but now I need to capitalize on that particular market. Now I have a presence in that market 'cause I just sold something, so people will be interested in hearing about that. So I'm going to pivot and do more in that particular market right now, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to layer in stuff where I have a particular, meeting going on. So, like for example, like earlier in the year, I closed a property in Mississippi. Okay, wonderful. So now I'm going to go and call everybody in and around that market in Mississippi and see if there's any properties I missed. We have a database with thousands of people, and we don't have time to possibly call them all. But I try to call the ones that make the most logical sense to pursue in that moment based on what I just sold and based on what people are wanting to buy. I'm not going to go try to convince someone to buy some, half empty mixed use property that's going to require, a long haul of cash and is not an opportunity zone. And you know what I mean? You have to size up what's popular right now and what are people wanting to buy. And is it a product that I believe in? Is the type of asset that would make sense to own that people are going to be happy to invest in? I don't want them calling me in 3, 5, 10 years saying, I can't believe why'd you sell me that? That property is doing terribly. I don't want that. So
Right.
I think it's about finding stuff that you believe in. And to answer your question about, what's my day like, it's again constantly recalibrating where are we light, where are we heavy in. It was interesting in 2019 for whatever reason I had 3 record years in a row, 2016, 17, 18 for me, personally. And then in 2019, and I had 2 juniors, and we for whatever reason, we had a number of assets that we just couldn't move. There wasn't really a ton wrong with them. They just weren't perfect for what people were looking for. We would get offers. We were always kind of apart. And there's a whole conversation about, getting sellers back to the table, getting sellers to understand why this is a deal they should take, et cetera. But what ended up happening was I said to Dan at the time, I said, we have all these great listings. If a couple things turn in the market, we're just going to sell all these. And sure enough, that's 6, 7, 8 listings that we couldn't sell in 2020. I think we sold all of them. And so that was the kind of thing where I knew we didn't really have an inventory problem. I would have liked to right size inventory a little bit more, but we needed to figure out a way to get the pricing fixed and get the market fixed, and then go and sell some of those. And the whole time, I'm constantly trying to work on getting more. We call them proposals, new evaluations for properties that could become listings. And that's an art in and of itself, but while you're doing all that, you need to make sure that your, list to close ratio is strong. You need to make sure that, let's say, for example, for every 8, evaluations you do, maybe you're going to get 2 to 4 listings. Of the 2 to 4 listings, maybe you're going to, put 1 to 2 under contract. And of those, maybe you're going to sell 1. Sometimes that, depending on the market, that's a fair barometer. It's 8 to 1 or 10 to 1 or 12 to 1. And then in a hot market, maybe it's, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, right? Maybe it's even 2 to 1. So it just depends on what you anticipate the hit rate being, and then you're constantly reevaluating it. If I've got a ton of listings, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with those listings. Then I'm going to pivot. I'm going to try to really, do everything I can to just get those listings sold. I'm always going to give 100% to try to sell all my listings anyway. But it's a question of, let's say I've got, a client, I already have 1 listing with them. I've, of course, been very upfront with them. Here's where pricing needs to be, you know, does it make sense to have them think that something's going to magically fall out of the sky and change that? No. If they have another property coming online and I can help them because I know that that property has a stronger path to leading them to success, we make sure that we maximize exposure for all the properties all the time. I always tell people, we'll have it on all the third-party services, but we'll also, of course, have it on marcusmillichap.com. It didn't used to be that, regular, just customers, non-agents, investors were able to see all the inventory. That was something that was an internal database, and of course, we use our own internal searches and alerts and saves and everything to go get notified when listings hit, but, during COVID, they made that available to everyone, and it's fantastic. Now, every investor can go use that and go online to marcusmilchap.com and look at the inventory and reach out to us. So, we try and make a ability to not only get maximum exposure, but also set expectations with the seller. If every once in a while, I have a seller who, for a variety of reasons, maybe they don't want, if it's a sale lease back situation. They don't want the people who they work with or their partners or somebody those partners don't want questions. They don't want the employees to have questions. Maybe they don't want a public listing. But I try to explain to them, I'm actually going to have to charge you more. It's going to be like a larger fee if this has to be an off market deal. And they go, "Wait, what?" And I explain because you're inherently reducing my exposure. I can't get it out
Right.
there. The odds of, even if I have a great buyer that I think would really be a good buyer for this property, if he knows he has it off market and there's no competition, he could drag his feet, he could retrade you late. I don't want that for anyone. I want you to get the highest price, and I want a clean sell. I want to get you closed, not just get you a bunch of offers, not just get you a bunch of exposure. So that means that I need to be able to generate 3, 4, 5 offers. And if this first buyer that we go with starts playing games, I can hold their feet to the fire and, bring in another buyer who's ready and willing. We've already got them vetted with our in-house mortgage broker. He's seen the guy's PFS. He knows whether or not this is a very viable buyer to jump in and finish the deal.
One thing that that stands out is you keep mentioning passion, and you being passionate about this or the other things. Tell me more about some of the things that you're currently most passionate about, whether it's in real estate or even beyond mentoring that you look forward to during the week.
Well, it's interesting. My kids are 11, soon to be 12. My son and daughter is 6.5. They're both really into soccer. I did not grow up with soccer. I, played a bunch of other sports, basketball, football, tennis, track, lots of different sports, broadcast baseball, broadcast volleyball, football, baseball, whatever, basketball. I I would never have expected that I would be involved in soccer. And but if that's something my kids want to do, of course, right? I'll do
Yep.
whatever I can to help them. Luckily, my wife played a lot of soccer growing up, so she knows way more about the sport than I do. But you asked like, what do I do? Maybe like outside of work, or what's part of my day. We just wrapped up the spring soccer season for my kids, and then we'll be coaching them in the fall as well. And, my wife does a lot more of the X's and O's type strategy stuff with soccer. But I try to, always motivate them and have them believe in themselves. And it was funny, this most recent season, the girls team did very well. We were shorthanded the first game, and then we won every game the rest of the season. They played very well. My son's team did not have the same experience. In fact, we did not win a single game the entire regular season. And then it came to the playoffs, and my wife and I have both been realizing that some of the players, they maybe didn't have great attendance, or they were having a hard time always getting to the games on time and this kind of thing. And so we just emailed all the parents, and we even told the players the exact same message. Say, if we just for just one day, let's just totally focus on this soccer tournament. We At the end of the year, they have a soccer tournament. And the same league that my wife grew up playing in, and it's really neat. So I said, let's all show up a half hour early for the game, and let's have a full team and give 100%, right? And even though we were the second to last seed in the tournament, we got an upset win in the first playoff game, And then the next game, they almost won. They lost by 1 goal to the team that went and played at the championship and lost in overtime by 1 goal, you know? So, they were that close. They just needed to show up, work hard, believe in yourself. And I think that resonated so much. The parents were so relieved and happy. They came up to us, you know, afterwards, you know, "We wanna thank you for all the work you've done." That was so satisfying that the parents felt the same way we did, you know, that that it's never too late to come together and focus and give 100%. You just have to believe that you can do it, and it's amazing what you can achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. My son, he's just turned 6, so he loves soccer as well. Yesterday we were watching the final. His favorite player is Ronaldo, so we're fully in the soccer mode at home. He practices, he focuses on it. And I think that's something, I think, to what you said before, the way we grew up in America, soccer wasn't, kind of a big deal. It wasn't there. But now lately it's been being pushed more and kids are more getting involved with the sport. And I think it's going to be even more, we have the FIFA World Cup coming in next year. So there's definitely going to be a lot more focus on soccer going forward.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, whatever a kid's passionate about, you know, if my kids, you know, want to do a particular sport or whatever it is, of course gonna lean into that and support them. You know, last year, my son really wanted to see Lionel Messi, you know, and of course he picks like the most popular player on the planet, you know, and he wanted to meet or see Lionel Messi. I thought, boy, you know, you don't want to tell him no, but you're like, well, this is a tall task, you know. What are the odds? And so we ended up we went down to Miami, went down to Fort Lauderdale, and saw them play against our local team, the Columbus Crew. And, it was a house divided because my kids are, fans of the Herons of, Inter Miami, and my wife and I are loyal to the Crew. She's been going to the game since they were an expansion team in the '90s, you know? Anyway, we were really excited to see Messi. Turns out this wasn't a game that Messi was even gonna be at, so scheduling fail there, but at least we got to see the game up close, and he got to see both teams play. He's very excited. He still wants to see Messi, right? So it just so happened late in the season, Inter Miami was coming to Columbus, and the Crew Stadium happens to be not far at all. You can walk to it from Marcus Millichap's office. You know, it was great. So my wife had a great idea. We'll get to the game early. We'll see when the bus comes in, and we'll be right there inside the stadium when they walk in. And sure enough, we got down to the we walked down to the front row, and we see right where they come in, and who comes in the back of the team? It's Lionel Messi. And my son's right there. He waves to him, and Messi sees him, points at him, waves right back. It was
That's
wonderful, you
incredible.
know? So you know, sometimes even if it seems really like a long shot, you know, you always want to say, "Hey, we'll give it a go." You know, that's I mean, it's part of the joy of sports, right? You never know what's going to happen. You know, I grew up in the '80s and '90s, so of course, you know, Michael Jordan was unbelievable. Even as a Cavs fan, you know, I had to admit, you know, Jordan was absolutely phenomenal. I still it's got a starting lineup figure of him. I don't know if you could see that, but you know, Jordan was absolutely phenomenal. And so, you know, in I think it was '93, he retired. And anyway, my dad and I thought we always still go to a Cavs game together. We'd never seen the Bulls play the Cavs, even though Jordan wasn't playing anymore. We'll still go see him, and we would go and we thought let's splurge and get some good seats. You know, we were like in the fifth row, and we got these seats. We had to go up to it was like the second floor of the Sandusky Mall, and they had a little ticket center there. You know, this is like I don't know 1994 or something, and we went and bought the tickets. Well, at least we'll get to see Scottie Pippen, and you know the team will be exciting. And you know the Cavs had gone to the Eastern Conference Finals, I think in '92. You know they were still a really good team. Well, anyway, comes around, you know, a couple weeks before that game in the spring, and Michael Jordan comes back. You know, he unretires. So all of a sudden, these are like the hottest tickets. You know, we had no idea. You know, we're sitting on a gold mine.
Wow.
So we're going up the steps to the game, right? At the Gund Arena. It was relative. They used to play at the Richfield Coliseum. We got to go there, and then they're at the new place where they're at now. Anyway, uh, this guy, he goes, tickets, tickets, and he looks at our tickets. He sees they're in the fifth row. He goes, I will give you $1,000 for those tickets. These are probably $50 tickets, right? When we
Oh
bought
wow.
them. And my dad let me decide. He says, I'll let you know, it's your call. What do you want to do? And I said, no, let's let it ride. We're gonna go and we're gonna watch this game together.
Of course.
And it ends up being the most thrilling game, as it just so happened, we were on the very edge of where the away team goes into the locker room. So Michael Jordan comes walking in. I actually got to touch Michael Jordan. And then we happened to be at the end where at the end of the game, they're down by 2. I knew he would go for the win because he thinks you always go for the win. He thinks big. And, sure enough, he goes for the 3, it goes around and around and falls out, which we were elated because we wanted the Cavs to win anyway, and my dad and I were so excited. It's like the best, like, father-son moment, and it's all because of the joy and randomness of sports.
Good job for making that decision. Money comes and goes, but memories last forever. I doubt that you'll be smiling, reminiscing so much about that experience if you got that $1,000. You probably wouldn't even know where you spent it on or if you saved it or not. So good job on that, especially as a kid making that decision. I see that you're very analytical. So you're very data driven. I'm sure you follow stats. I know you love sports. In sports, there are milestones. For example, if you're a receiver, you achieve let's say you have 100 receptions a year. It's a big deal. You have career receptions. If you get to 1,000 in your career, it's a huge deal. Do you set milestones for yourself, whether it's yearly or career, where you want to go to? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's something that, we spend a lot of time with, is with the junior agents as well, things that are measurable, metrics that are measurable. Even though, yes, this is I guess in December, I'll be with the company, 13 years. I still track every single contact I add into the database, every single property I add to the database, every single call. And I track those to see what areas I'm slipping because, it is a metric. You can follow, you make so much, you make $2 for every call or $3 for every call or whatever, whatever, you break it down per call. You're literally getting paid money. You make calls, you make money. Or it's interactions. It's getting on that plane and going to meet that client. It's going to the trouble to, do that tour, or do that meeting, whatever the case may be. So, and some people, they're really passionate about mailers, lots of emails. I like, you do it what way feels right for you. For me, it's a call, and then I know I'm probably gonna get busy with other, listings and deals and stuff. So I'm not gonna have time to like go and call that person later that afternoon or try to call them again 2 days later or something like that. So I just call them once and then I send a follow-up email. Uh, if I don't have the right email, we send a message or go database or whatever in the moment and just go solve that. So for me, it's twofold. It's tracking your everyday metrics and then for the year, obviously like how many deals did you close? What was your ultimate, net? And Marcus Millichap does a great job of trying to educate agents to help keep more of the money that they make. So they had a seminar, it was probably 2, 3 years ago now, on the value of having your own LLC and what should be in it and how the attorney could draft it, et cetera. And so because of that urging, I went and created my own, LLC for my business. And it helped me understand all the different ways that you can increase and benefit how you operate the business from a tax perspective and help keep more of your money. So, I mean, those are some things I learned, but if it's not, something that you can readily measure, you're gonna have a tough time, proving 5, 6, 7 years back whether or not you've been actually making real progress, irrespective of the market. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes that newer agents make, especially, you hear the horror stories, the agents that came in 2006 or 7, market was red hot, and then bam, 2008 just totally slapped them in the face. Or, people who are coming in. Maybe they lucked out and they had incredible timing, late 2020, 2021. Like, "Oh my gosh, this is so easy." And then next thing you know, 2022 deals start slowing down a little bit, 2023, maybe they come to a trickle, and those people are now, have no idea what to do. So, if they didn't lay the groundwork in the beginning, they don't know where you don't know where you came from. My first managing broker, Michael Glass, he's since, risen quite a bit with the company, but, he would always say, "You're walking in wet cement." You're leaving, footprints, you're leaving a mark behind everywhere that you go. So, that's not only just you being able to track your own progress and know how you got somewhere when you did something right, but also fix a problem quickly if you make a mistake. And then also, obviously, like, you're making an impression on the clients, the owners, as you interact with them.
And as you hit these milestones, let's just say you set yourself a dollar amount you want to close every year. Are there things you do to reward yourself, or is it just back to work the next day?
I mean, it's funny, like, initial, first, like, 3, 4 years, whatever, feels like more of a momentous occasion. I think now, it's definitely easy to have it be more of like a on to the next, kind of feeling. I'm more happy for, the owners, right, than me, or, if it makes other people around me feel better, and like it's a relief, that's great. I mean, we've all had the situation where, a stressed out seller wasn't sure if a deal was going to go through. A buyer's got a stack calendar coming up of other things in their life. When they let me in, when they let me know, hey, they've got this, personal issue, or they have, you pick it, they're trying to close 4 or 5 other deals. They have a baby on the way. They have, a kid that's about to graduate and move away. They don't want to miss their college. The kid's got an important event. They have a big, international travel trip coming up. Whatever the thing is in their life, if they let me in, they trust me enough to share that with me. And then when we're done and the deal is complete and they're so happy and they say, not only was that an amazing experience, but here's X, Y, and Z, partner or relative or friend who I want to refer business to you. That's the highest, honor. I mean, there's no greater honor a client can give you than a referral.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a referral is almost just confirmation of a great job. I don't think I've ever met somebody who would refer somebody after they did a horrible job. For you going forward, right? You said this is going to be your 13 years at the company. What does it look like the next 5 to 10 years? Is it more of the same, or is this something that you want to change, or something that you want to achieve, both work wise and personal wise?
Well, I think that there are a lot of places you could go with that. The obvious one is, and it's funny, we just had a meeting about this last week. What the titles are. Marcus Millichap, they're constantly watching. What's relative and proper in the industry. I think I'm first vice president of investments or something like that. Now, that may change to be in line with what, they're seeing is more common, but you're always looking, okay, like how many more sales, how many more commissions, whatever do I have to get to the next title? I mean, that's more of just internal respect, amongst the team, people in the industry, people in the brokerage. Know that that's all great and wonderful. I think it's more about, hey, did I make enough of a difference, to all these different people? Am I, balancing between you want, any agent has some level of competitiveness and ego. They wouldn't be very good at this job if they didn't have that and self-belief. So, doing those deals that looked almost impossible, doing those deals that everybody counted you out, that's always a fun experience. But you also need to say, I need, like, going back to the singles and doubles, I also need to have some stuff that's going to keep the lights on. Let's pick proper, realistic down the fairway project, paychecks over, dreamer projects. So, sometimes even if you put together, an incredible tactical accomplishment because you just know that was a really hard deal to sell, it's kind of like, you won the battle, but you lost the war, because how much time did you spend on that project that you may have been able to do something else with and sell, a bunch more, reasonable, traditional, saleable, larger buyer pool assets. that. So, like for example, I was this is maybe my first or second year in the business. I took a listing. It was an office property in Columbus, but it wasn't a great location and it didn't have a great rent roll. And I told the seller, I said, this is going to be such a difficult property to sell. I'm going to need a 10% fee on it, and some people were real surprised I was able to get a 10% fee on it. And I did sell the property. However, it was so difficult to sell. I had to admit to Dan, I said, Dan, I think you're right. Even though I got a ten point fee and I sold this, I did sell it. This still is probably kind of a loss because I could have maybe made more money and sold more properties in the time it took to sell this. Same thing with, gosh, maybe my first or second year in, I took a really hard assignment. It was like a large mixed use project. A similar thing, I think I said I'm gonna need at least a 7, 8% fee. It may have been a 10% fee as well. And, I ended up selling it, but same thing, I told Dan afterwards, I said, "We got it done," but that project ended up taking, I think, 4.5 or 5 years to
Wow.
completely from the time frame of helping bring the owner along, helping, get the rent roll right sized, end up, selling the asset. It unfortunately, it was very time consuming. Again, I was happy to help them and make a difference, but just from a, deal flow standpoint, it maybe was not, the smartest, most efficient process. So sometimes if we see something that's gonna be a really long road, we say, "Look, we'll walk that road with you, but here's where it's probably gonna have to transact, pricing wise. You have to have realistic expectations, and also, you're gonna have to do X, Y, and Z." That's why, when you see projects that are, maybe they're a relatively complicated multi-tenant property, a mixed use, something that's in a smaller market, but you see there's a kernel of something there, either because it has one or two great tenants, or it has a great owner, or both. If they're willing to, jump through the hoops accordingly and help you help them, then it's really inspiring. Had an amazing experience with an owner. Yeah, I came in and met with him, and he just absolutely rolled out the red carpet. He had his whole team ready. They're all dressed. He ordered a lunch. He had these pamphlets made. He even this guy's an author. He even gave me a copy of his book, and it was an incredible experience. I thought, wow, like who wouldn't want to run through a wall for this guy? And he was so smart. He knew that. He knew agents are going to try harder. They're going to want this deal more, because they realize that this guy is a great guy at work, irrespective of the asset, even if the asset is not so great, right? And
Right.
I explained to him, I said, because it happened to be an older building, I said, people are going to want to know whether or not this property has any environmental issues. They're gonna wanna know whether or not, it's got an Alta land survey to appease their lender. I said, if we're fortunate enough to get a strong 1031 buyer, they're gonna pay top dollar for this, because even if they're several states away, because they can see that it's deliverable. You have your survey done, you have a clean phase one, etcetera, right? And I even said, really what should happen is you should pay for your own inspection report so that you have a completely clean inspection, so they can see there's no material issues with it. Because even though it was older, I could tell this guy was detail oriented. I bet it didn't have any major problems. And luckily my bet was right, because when he paid the money for all those third party reports, yeah, that was a major hit up front. That was a, 8, 10, $12,000 hit for him. He ended up making that back, tenfold, because, we got a great exchange buyer to pay top dollar for it. And I don't blame them, because it was all teed up. So those are the kind of success stories where, you understand that the owner follows your advice and you're able to make it a much more seamless transaction. You actually get them closed rather than, just getting a bunch of offers and a bunch of activity that doesn't actually lead to the sale they're looking for.
Like in our business, when you go from, what you mentioned earlier, like in the later part of your career where you just keep closing deals, you almost go with it as if it's normal. You don't really stop and reflect and say, wow, I did good. You pat yourself on the back. Did you ever have a point in your career, not necessarily your big deal, where you said to yourself, wow, I'm really proud of myself on this one. Like I really outdid myself. I'm on the right path. I love what I'm doing. This is good for me.
You know, it's funny, because I told you about, I have the background in research at LexisNexis and things like that. Uh, I was always a little bit more of a database nerd than the average agent. I would try and not be too much of like a complainer, but there were certain things I wanted in the CRM, the client resource management software. And, to Darpan and Dan's credit, they understood like this is all coming from a good place. This guy wants to be able to maximize this research tool, and he's using all the features of it and everything like that. I didn't just want something that's just boom, boom, boom. Here's a next phone number. And make 200 calls a day and all that. I mean, there's some people that can do that, and that's really impressive that you can have that consistency and make hundreds of calls all the time. That's really amazing. But for me, I wanted to be able to distill down and get really accurate and precise with it. And I knew there would be a time where I would need to do this. I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of like to do it necessarily like quickly every single day or that it was going to be under pressure. But I knew that I just didn't want to call a lot of people trying to sell them something that, based on their prior ownership or portfolio, they probably had no realistic interest in buying this you know? Uh, how do you feel when every time somebody shows up at your door, and they're trying to sell you, solar panels and, yard, every kind of pest control thing known to man, and you're kind of like, yeah, I don't need that, or you have somebody who does that. I'm not interested in this, etc. So I ended up getting into this. It was a single tenant government asset, and the owner knew he had a great location, but the lease wasn't very strong, and wasn't a lot of time left. Wasn't a clear path. You couldn't tell 100% they were going to renew. It was a good chance they were going to renew. Um, but he was, mainly in the like industrial space and warehouse, mixed use, etc. And he just was really passionate that this is a property that should command top dollar. And he ended up letting me sell it. But the problem was because of his price, it was hard to get a lot of people to look at it really seriously. And also, we knew that there might be a problem with getting access to the property because it was government. And then also, like, what happens if there is a potential vacancy issue? Who's gonna sublet that, or who's gonna go in and if it's complete relet, right? Who are you gonna put in? And what was interesting is it also had partial vacancy too, so it wasn't 100% occupied. Well, anyway, these were the challenges that we knew on the front end. I would get some people that would kind of kick it around, and eventually we came down to the point where there's 2 weeks left, 7 days left, 5 days left. And yeah, he was just kind of getting annoyed with me that, I wasn't bringing, a top offer. I wasn't going to get this done. He was, going around, and he would literally tell me that he had these other agents that were ready to list it like the moment that the listing expired. He's asking like, when does your listing expire? He's almost like making fun of me. And so it was like 5 o'clock on a Friday that it expired. Okay. And, so I literally thought, "Okay, I've got one last chance to try to sell this." And so I went through the database, and I filtered by the region, and then I filtered by anybody that had owned, like, this type of property, and then I filtered by people who I had their contacts, and I had either talked to them once before. I was pretty sure it was the right contact information, and I started out, I think, with something like 3,500 potential contacts, and I narrowed it down to, like, 10. And from the 10, I was able to get a hold of 6, I think. From the 6, I was able to get 3 people that would actually listen to me. And I literally think I had something like 15 minutes left I remember with like a half hour left, I called him. I was like, "Hey, like, don't give up yet. Like, I've got somebody that's really interested." He's like, "Whatever. Like, listening's almost over, man. It's absurd, you know?" And sure enough, with like 10, 15 minutes left before the listing expired, I submitted an LOI, and that guy ended up buying the property, and we
Wow.
got the job done. And so, those are some really long odds, but it's a classic case of use your tools, use what you're good at, and never give up.
Yeah, it's like a buzzer beater in sports. I mean, you cannot get better than that, right?
And with no retrades and double-ended it. So, I mean, yeah, it was great, and the really neat thing about it was after that, he called me up afterwards. He says, "I really wanna thank you for getting this across the finish line." He says, "I really don't think there's any other broker who could have possibly done that." And, he continued to call me, all the time for that, and we still work together. And if he's ever has a question about a property, he's got another property he's thinking about selling, even if it's just something general about the real estate market, he'll always call me. And I try to pick up every time I possibly can because I love talking to him. And, we now know, all this stuff that's going on where he's traveling to and family life and all that, and it's wonderful. And so it's being able to deliver for somebody and earn their trust and respect. That's the kind of stuff that you live for.
No, absolutely. And Justin, you have an amazing career. I think you have so much to look forward to. You're doing extremely well. We've never really came across somebody who's specializes in government leasing sales as much as you and does so well. I think a lot of people in real estate they try to chase those the big assets with if it's a residential, I want to sell $20 million listings. But this goes to show that you can be extremely successful in being very niched and being a perfectionist in that niche like you are. So you have a very, very impressive background. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was very insightful. You are a wealth of information. I look forward to obviously staying in touch as years progress, and hopefully we'll do another one of these in a couple of years, and we'll see what your career looks like then.
Absolutely. Would be thrilled to do so. Thank you so much, Farouk and Farhad. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thanks.
All
Justin.
right. Thank you.
Talk later.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.